She's just a nobody. That's what my mother said, loud enough for the silverware to rattle. Then she laughed like my existence was some family joke she'd been rehearsing for years. My brother didn't flinch. My father looked down at his plate. But Sophia, my brother's fiancée, froze, her phone suddenly hovering just below the table as she typed my name into Google. I saw her eyes widen. I saw the color drain from my mother's face. In less than 30 seconds, everything in that room shifted, and none of them were ready for what she found. My name is Emma Carter, and if you'd stepped into my parents' house that night, you might have thought you were walking into a magazine spread. Warm lights, polished wood, a table set like a quiet brag. Everything about that home was designed to convince the world we were the picture of a perfect suburban family in Virginia. But perfection in our house was always a performance, and I was never part of the cast. I grew up inside those walls knowing exactly where I stood. My mother, Susan, curated our family's image the way some people trim rose bushes, relentlessly and with no room for flaws. My father, David, stayed quiet out of habit, not malice. And my brother, Ryan, well, he was the son everything else revolved around. His trophies lined the hallway. His photos covered the walls. His name filled every conversation. The golden child, the pride, the one who made them look good. There wasn't a single photo of me on that hallway wall. Not one. The first time I noticed I was 13. The last time I noticed was the night everything changed. Growing up, I learned invisibility before I learned independence. I still remember being 7 years old, running through the front door, holding a short story I'd written. My teacher had circled the title with a bright red A+ and scribbled, "Exceptional Imagination," in the corner. I placed it right in front of my mother while she tied Ryan's cleats for his big game. She barely glanced at it. "That's nice, honey. Put it on the counter. We'll look at it later." Later never came. 3 days afterward, I found my story under a stack of mail, stained with a coffee ring. No one had read a word. By high school, I'd stopped offering pieces of myself. Every writing competition, every article published in the local teen magazine, every accolade. It all slipped quietly into drawers in my room because every time I tried to share, I got the same response. "Writing is a hobby, Emma. You need something more stable." Meanwhile, Ryan won an award for a business class project, and my mother invited neighbors over to celebrate. So I did what quiet kids with big thoughts often do. I left. Chicago became my world. A tiny apartment, a borrowed desk, midnight writing sessions after long shifts, stacks of drafts rising like fragile towers beside my bed. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. And for the first time, people actually saw my work. Professors encouraged me. Editors pushed me. Margaret Lane, still the sharpest mind I've ever known, looked at my pages and said, "There's a voice here, a real one." I built a career brick by brick, publication by publication, book by book. The irony? My work traveled farther than I ever did. My name ended up in places my family never bothered to look. I didn't hide my success. I just didn't volunteer it anymore. There's only so many times a person can be dismissed before they stop handing over pieces of their heart. Which brings me back to that dinner, to the polished table and the curated smiles, to my mother laughing at me, the sound sharp enough to cut. Ryan talking about honeymoon plans like it was the only future that mattered. My father avoiding eye contact, as if silence could soften the blow. And Sophia, new to the family but sharper than all of them, watching the exchange with a growing confusion that quickly turned into suspicion. She didn't understand why they spoke to me the way they did, why my mother's laughter felt so rehearsed, why I seemed to shrink a little every time someone mentioned Ryan. Then she picked up her phone, and the life I'd built far from that house, the one they'd never bothered to ask about, was suddenly right there, glowing on her screen. Sophia didn't look away from her phone at first. Her thumb hovered over the screen, scrolling slowly, like she wasn't sure she was allowed to believe what she was reading. I watched the light from the screen flicker across her face. Confusion first, then curiosity, then something like disbelief. And right beside her, my mother kept talking, unaware that the world she'd built was starting to crack. "So the venue says they can probably move us up the list," Susan said, cutting her steak with stiff precision. "Of course, once they realize it's Ryan's wedding, they'll make it happen." Sophia hummed politely, still staring at her phone. Ryan didn't notice. He was too busy describing the custom suit he'd ordered for the big day. My father just nodded along as he always did, quietly orbiting my mother's opinions. I took a sip of water to ground myself. The room felt too warm, as if the walls themselves remembered every slight from my childhood, and were leaning in to watch what would happen next. My mother's laughter rang again, sharp, metallic. "You know, Sophia," she said, lowering her voice like she was sharing a secret, "Emma has always been sensitive. She takes things too seriously. She just needs to lighten up." There it was, the familiar dismissal, the same tone she'd used my entire life. The one that reduced every feeling I ever had into something inconvenient or dramatic. I felt my jaw tighten. Not in anger exactly, but in recognition. This was who she was. This was who she had always been. But Sophia didn't smile, didn't nod. She didn't even pretend to agree. She just whispered, almost to herself, "That's odd." My mother caught it. "What's odd?" Sophia finally looked up, straight at me. Not with pity, not with confusion, but with the kind of curiosity people have when they discover a locked door in a house they thought they already knew. "Nothing," she said gently. "I was just looking something up." The table stilled for a moment. Barely noticeable, unless you'd lived your whole life sensing tension before it hit. Ryan paused his monologue about the honeymoon. My father shifted in his chair. My mother narrowed her eyes. "What are you looking up?" she asked too casually. Sophia hesitated. I saw it, just a blink, but enough to reveal she was piecing things together. The dynamics, the silences, the way no one asked me a single thing about my life. Something wasn't adding up for her. And she wasn't the type to ignore missing pieces. Before she could answer, Ryan jumped in. "Probably something about the wedding." "Don't stress her out, Mom." Susan forced a smile but didn't take her eyes off Sophia. "Well, I hope it's something useful. There's a lot to finalize." I pushed a carrot around my plate. The air felt heavy, like a storm cloud forming over the centerpieces. The worst part was I knew exactly what Sophia was seeing on her screen. I could picture the search results the same way I once pictured story plots while staring at a blank page. Articles, reviews, interviews, awards, my name printed in crisp fonts that my mother had never bothered to Google. And for the first time that night, I didn't feel invisible. I felt exposed. Not in a bad way. In a way that suggested a fuse had been lit somewhere under the table. Sophia looked at me again, this time longer. Not surprised, not confused, realizing, understanding. Then she set her phone face down next to her wine glass, folded her hands and breathed in slowly, as if choosing the exact next moment to speak. It was the breath before impact. For a long moment nobody spoke. The clink of silverware, the soft hum of the dining room vent. Everything faded under the weight of what Sophia wasn't saying. She'd found something. I knew it. She knew it. And somewhere behind the tension tightening my spine, my mother sensed it too. "So," Susan said, lifting her wine glass with forced brightness, "as I was saying, the florist can do the arrangements in Ryan's colors. It'll be elegant, timeless. Exactly the sort of event people in this community expect from us." That word had always meant 3 people, not 4. Sophia didn't touch her glass. Her gaze stayed on me, soft but searching, as though she was seeing the outlines of someone the Carter family had refused to acknowledge for years. And while she watched me, I felt something inside loosen and tighten at the same time. A strange mix of dread and a rising sense of inevitability that I breathed in slowly, letting the familiarity of this dynamic settle over me one more time. The practiced dismissals, the choreographed hierarchy, the years of being spoken around rather than to. But tonight, something felt different, like the script was slipping out of their hands line by line. Ryan finally noticed the silence. "Sophia, everything okay?" She blinked, straightened slightly. "Yeah, I'm just thinking." Susan let out a short laugh. "Well, don't overthink. This family is easy to understand. We keep things simple." I almost asked her who we included, but I didn't have to. Sophia answered in a way that shifted the balance an inch closer toward truth. "I don't think simple is the word I'd use," she murmured. My mother's fork froze midair. "Excuse me." Sophia softened the edge of her voice. "I just mean I've been watching all of you tonight. And I guess I'm trying to understand the dynamic." "It's a normal family dynamic," Susan said sharply. "Perfectly normal." That was always her line. Normal. Perfect. Unquestionable. As long as I stayed small. I felt a faint tremor in my hands and tucked them under the table, not from fear, but from something I hadn't let myself feel around them in years. Readiness. A quiet, steady readiness for whatever came next. My father cleared his throat, nerves audible. Maybe we should talk about something lighter. But Sophia didn't break eye contact with me. Emma, she said softly, what do you do in Chicago again? Before I could answer, Susan cut in. She edits something at some small place. Nothing serious. The word nothing landed like a stone dropping into a well. Sophia's jaw flexed, almost imperceptibly. That's not exactly what I saw. The room went very still. Ryan frowned. Saw? What do you mean? Sophia hesitated just for a breath, but that breath carried years of silence, bruised pride, and the ache of being minimized in my own family. Her finger tapped the edge of her phone. A tiny, decisive sound. I looked something up, she said. My mother's composure cracked for half a second. Why would you look anything up? Because, Sophia answered gently, the way you all talked to Emma, it didn't make sense to me. There it was. The sentence my younger self had begged anyone to say. My father shifted uncomfortably. Ryan rubbed the back of his neck. And Susan, for the first time all night, looked like someone had pulled a thread loose from the tapestry she'd spent decades weaving. Sophia picked up her phone again, holding it between her palms like something fragile. I wanted to understand her, so I searched her name. My pulse thrummed in my ears. Margaret once told me, truth has a strange way of finding daylight, even when people bury it. Tonight, daylight was coming through Sophia's hands. And I knew whatever she'd found, it was enough to end the silence, enough to crack the performance, enough to make the next breath heavier than the last. Sophia didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. The quiet way she said my name, steady, deliberate, cut sharper than anything my mother had thrown at me for years. I think we should look at this together, she said, lifting her phone just high enough for the light to catch the screen. Ryan leaned in first, his forehead creased. I watched his eyes scan the page, line after line, until they widened with something between shock and disbelief. No way, he breathed. Emma, this is you? My mother reached across the table as if she had a right to the truth she'd always refused. Let me see that. Sophia didn't hand it to her. She held the phone where everyone could see. The author photo was unmistakable. My face, my name printed across a clean, simple web page from a major publisher. My mother blinked hard. This is you? You wrote these things. Her voice sounded too thin, like she didn't trust it. I didn't answer. I wanted to see what she'd do with the truth first. Sophia continued reading aloud, not with arrogance or pity, but with the calm precision of someone laying out facts that should have been known long ago. Emma Carter, she read slowly, author of 2 award-winning books, winner of multiple national literary prizes, guest lecturer at universities. Her second novel is currently being adapted for film. My father made a small, startled sound. His shoulders sagged, as if someone had removed a weight he didn't realize he'd been carrying the wrong way. I don't understand, he said. Why didn't we know? The question should have sounded concerned. It only sounded guilty. Sophia scrolled. There are interviews, reviews, panels, videos. It's all public. Anyone could have seen this with one search. That was the part that finally cracked something in me. Not the shock, not the recognition, but the simplicity. Anyone but them. My mother's expression went rigid. This must be some kind of mix-up. Maybe you submitted something once and they exaggerated. I let out a quiet breath. It's not a mix-up. She flinched at my tone. It wasn't loud. It wasn't angry. It was final. You could have told us, she snapped, grasping at control. You could have made sure we understood. My fingers curled against my lap. Mom, I tried, I said, keeping my voice steady even though my throat felt tight. You just never listened. She opened her mouth, but Sophia stepped in, gentle but firm. Susan, she gave you so many chances. Ryan looked at me like he was finally seeing the ghost at his side. Emma, seriously, all this time? My father took off his glasses, rubbing the lenses with trembling fingers. Those awards, those articles, they're a big deal, aren't they? They are, Sophia said before I could. Huge. For a moment the room held its breath. Something raw passed over my father's face. Something like regret. Something my mother fought against with every rigid line in her posture. She pointed a shaky finger at the phone. So what? You wrote a few things and people like them. That doesn't mean. My laugh stopped her cold. It wasn't bitter, just tired, bone-deep tired. Mom, I said quietly. I didn't need you to understand the publishing world. I just needed you to look at me. To see me. Silence fell so heavily that even the air felt tight. I looked at Ryan. Do you remember the year I won the statewide writing competition? He blinked, unsure. Maybe, I had a game that day, right? You had a playoff, I corrected softly. Mom and Dad chose to go to that instead. I turned to my mother. Her jaw clenched, but her eyes flickered, like she was bracing for something she'd always avoided. I brought home the trophy, I continued. I put it on the kitchen counter. You moved it the next day because it cluttered the space. It ended up in a box in the basement. The memory hit my father. I could see it in the way his shoulders fell. I swallowed. And when my first book came out, I mailed you copies. Signed. You never opened the package. That's not fair, my mother snapped. We were busy. So was I said. But I still sent them. A long, fragile pause stretched between us. Then Sophia, God bless her, asked the exact question no one else dared. Susan, did you ever once Google Emma's name? Even out of curiosity. My mother stiffened. I don't make a habit of snooping. It's not snooping, Sophia replied, voice gentle but cutting. It's caring. My father closed his eyes, not in anger but in realization. We really didn't know, he whispered. But maybe we should have. Ryan shook his head slowly, stunned. I swear I didn't mean to. I know, I interrupted. It wasn't you. Not really. Everything had always orbited Mom. You thrived in the sunlight she gave you. I lived in the shadows she insisted were just where I belonged. My mother's composure finally cracked. So what now? You want an apology? You want us to grovel? I stared at her. This woman who had spent decades claiming perfection while missing the truth right under her nose. No, I said. I just want honesty for once. My father whispered. We failed you. My mother looked like she wanted to argue but couldn't. Not with the evidence glowing from Sophia's phone. Not with the quiet conviction in my voice. Not with the truth she'd spent years avoiding rising like a tide around her. Sophia placed the phone face down on the table, ending the interrogation with tenderness. I think Emma deserves better than the way she's been treated. And maybe tonight is a chance to start over. Ryan nodded. Yeah, it is. My father swallowed hard. If you're willing. My mother didn't speak. For the first time in my life, she genuinely had nothing to say. I stood pushing back my chair. My legs were steady, strangely beautifully steady. I'm not asking for perfection, I told them. Just recognition. A little space at the table you've kept me outside of for years. I wasn't sure if they could do it. But I finally knew one thing. If they didn't, I'd still be okay. Because I'd built a life where I wasn't invisible. And tonight they finally saw it. I left that night without slamming a door, without demanding a single promise. I simply gathered my coat, nodded politely, and walked out into the cold Virginia air. For once, the chill felt clean, like oxygen after years of breathing through a filter. The next morning, I drove back to Chicago. The highway unfurled quiet and steady beneath me, giving me space I didn't know I needed. My apartment felt different when I opened the door, as if it had been waiting for me to step back into my own life fully, without splitting myself into daughter and writer. 3 weeks passed before my father called. Not with small talk, not with excuses. He asked for the title of my first book. His voice shook a little when he said he wanted to start from the beginning. A month later, a package arrived from Virginia. New copies of my books, each one dog-eared and filled with sticky tabs. Inside the first cover was a note in his neat handwriting. I'm listening now. Thank you for not giving up on your voice. My throat tightened in a way awards had never made me feel. Ryan called next, asking about my next project, asking real questions. And Sophia checked in often, not out of guilt but warmth. She told me she wanted her future kids to know Emma the author, not Emma the afterthought. Even my mother shifted, slowly, awkwardly. She joined a book club. She recommended my novel. hesitant but proud. When she spoke to me, there was a new carefulness, as if she finally realized words could wound. Our family wasn't magically fixed, but the fog had begun to lift. And for the first time, I didn't feel like I was walking toward them in the dark. 3 months after that dinner, I stood in my living room holding my father's letter and realizing something simple but powerful. Being overlooked never defined me. I had already built a life worth seeing. Their recognition was a late arrival, not the foundation. And maybe that's what healing really is. Letting truth speak louder than old roles. If you've ever fought to be seen, tell me your story in the comments. And if this one stayed with you, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next chapter. You never know whose truth might echo yours.